All right, today we're tackling a big one. I mean, maybe the biggest question of all.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. How did you become, well, you? You went from this tiny, helpless baby to the person listening to this right now. That journey is just incredible, right? So, how'd that happen? What are the rules? What's the code that got you here?
That's a mystery that has kept people up at night for centuries. But here's the cool part. Today, we're not just going to sit around and philosophize about it. Nope, we're going to dive straight into the science that's actually trying to crack that code.
All right, let's get into it. First up, the science of growth. So this whole field has a name, of course. It's called developmental psychology. And it's exactly what it sounds like, the scientific study of how we humans grow and change. And it used to be all about kids, but now it covers our entire lifespan. We're talking physical, cognitive, social, emotional, literally from the womb to the tomb. Okay, but why should you care? What's the point? Well, the goals here are actually super practical. First, this science helps us describe what typical development even looks like. That way we can start to explain how and why we change. And here's the really important part. It lets us spot when things might be going off track and, create ways to help people get the support they need. This stuff has a huge real-world impact. But to come up with these big, powerful ideas, you can't just guess. You need cold, hard data. So the million-dollar question is, how in the world do you get inside the mind of a child? Let's take a look at how scientists actually do it. Okay, so there are basically two big ways to do this, and the best way to get it is with an analogy. Think of a cross-sectional study as a snapshot. You take a picture of a group of 5-year-olds and a picture of a group of 7-year-olds right now at the same time. But a longitudinal study, that's more like a movie. You follow the exact same kids from the time they're 5 all the way until they're 7, watching the whole story unfold. And to get the actual information for these snapshots and movies, psychologists have a whole bag of tricks. I mean, they can just ask kids questions directly, or they can go full-on documentary mode and just watch kids in their natural habitat, like a playground or a classroom. Or, if they're trying to test something really specific, they'll set up these clever little experiments. So all this data collection, it led to some absolutely giant theories. And if you're going to talk about developmental psychology, you have to start with one of the biggest names in the game. A man whose ideas basically wrote the rulebook for education for decades, Jean Piaget, the lone scientist. If you boil down Piaget's entire theory to one single sentence, it's this: development comes before learning. Think about that. He believed that a kid's brain has to be biologically ready. It has to reach a certain stage before they can really learn a new idea. It's why you can't teach algebra to a 4-year-old. It's not that they're not smart, their brain just hasn't built the right hardware yet. For Piaget, development is what unlocks the door to learning. And he laid out this whole journey in 4 clear-cut stages. It starts with the sensory motor stage. That's from 0 to 2, when babies are basically learning about the world by, touching it, grabbing it, putting it in their mouths. Then you get the pre-operational stage, where words and imagination just explode, but everything is still very me, me, me. After that comes concrete operational. Logic finally starts to kick in, but for real, tangible stuff. And then finally, we hit the formal operational stage, where we get the power of abstract thought. We can think about what-ifs and big ideas. So you see the picture Piaget's painting? He sees kids as these little mini scientists, all on their own, actively exploring and figuring out the world. And this is a huge part of his theory. He thought these stages were totally universal. It didn't matter if you were in Switzerland or Samoa, every kid went through the exact same stages in the exact same order. It was like a biological program just running its course. But what if that's not the whole story? What if a child isn't a lone scientist working in a vacuum? What if they're more like an apprentice learning a trade? That idea brings us to the other major heavyweight in this debate, Piaget's great rival, Lev Vygotsky, the social apprentice. And Vygotsky, well, he took Piaget's core idea and flipped it completely upside down. He said, no. Learning doesn't wait for development. Learning causes development. It pulls it forward. So for him, you don't just sit around waiting for a kid to be ready. The right kind of teaching and help can actually speed up their growth. Vygotsky's most famous idea is something called the zone of proximal development, or ZPD for short. Just think of it as the magic sweet spot for learning. It's that space between what a kid can already do all by themselves and what they can't do yet, but they can do with a little help. Help from a parent or a teacher or even a friend who's a bit better at it. Vygotsky called them the more knowledgeable other. That zone, he said, is where the real learning happens. So you see the difference? In Vygotsky's world, kids are apprentices. They learn how to think and act by interacting with the people around them. Development isn't some preset biological program. It's all about culture. It's shaped by the language you speak, the tools you use, and the community you grow up in. Okay, so we've got the lone scientist versus the social apprentice, Piaget versus Vygotsky, two massive competing theories about how we become who we are. But in the last couple of decades, a huge plot twist entered the scene, and it's something called psychology's weird problem. And right about now, you're probably thinking, okay, just tell me, who was right, who won? And the answer today is, well, it's really complicated, because it turns out the science itself had a massive blind spot.
What researchers started to realize is that almost everything we thought we knew about human beings was actually based on studying a tiny and very specific group of people. They came up with a great acronym for it, WEIRD. It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic.
And here's the kicker. The things we learned from this one tiny group were being passed off as universal human truths for everybody on Earth. I mean, think back to Piaget. His incredible, world-changing theories were based on his super detailed observations of his own kids in Switzerland almost 100 years ago. That's about as weird a sample as you can get.
And when you actually look at the numbers, the problem is just staggering. An absolutely tiny fraction of the world's population has been the subject of most of our psychological research. It's like we were trying to understand the entire Amazon rainforest by only studying a single potted plant in an office.
Okay, so where does that leave us? Does this mean Piaget and Vygotsky are totally wrong and we should just throw it all out? No, not at all. It just means we need to add a really important layer of context. So let's wrap this up by talking about what this all means for you. All right, here's what to take away from all this. First, it's not Piaget versus Vygotsky anymore. The modern view is that development is a really complex dance between our biology and our culture. They both matter a lot. Second, these theories are still super useful. They're like different pairs of glasses you can put on to understand the kids in your own life. And third, and this is maybe the most important one, it teaches us to be skeptical in a good way, to always ask that crucial question whenever we hear about a new study. Okay, but who did you actually study? And that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. If our environment, our culture, our community helps write the code of who we become, well, that puts a pretty huge responsibility on all of us, doesn't it? The question stops being just, how did I become me? And starts being, what kind of story will we help the next generation write for themselves?